Indian philosophy. What a pity it is that the richness and depth of thinking in the Indian philosophical traditions should be all but sealed off from Western philosophy by the veil of Sanskrit and Pali. The metaphysics, epistemology, logic, and ethics of the Indian schools also lie behind the veil of a misapprehension about their nature, namely that they are exclusively religions or theologies rather than philosophies. In fact, most of the schools are non theist. The misapprehension arises from the fact that one instructive way of explaining the aim of all Indian philosophy is to say that it is soteriological. A soteriology is a doctrine of salvation, in that it seeks to bring to an end the suffering that is existence by understanding the true nature of reality. Accordingly, all the schools offer a complete package of metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics as a system, and the fact that their practical aim is escape from suffering offers to many an invitation to apply a lazy extension of the term religion to them. The schools of Indian philosophy are known as darshanas. Darshana literally means sight, and by extension, view, in the sense of viewpoint or standpoint. They divide broadly into two groups, those that are Astika, or orthodox, and those that are Nastika, heterodox. The distinction turns on whether or not the Darshana accepts as fundamental the authority of the Vedas, the ancient writings of India, Veda meaning knowledge or wisdom. The darshanas that do not accept the authority of the Vedas are Buddhism, Jainism, and the Carvaka school, and that is why they are described as heterodox. The Vedas consist of four collections or samhitas: the Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharvaveda. The Rigveda is the Veda of the hymns of wisdom. The next two share much the same content as the Rigveda, but are especially applied to use in sacrificial rites and as liturgical hymns, respectively, while the Atharvaveda stands apart as a collection of formulae for counteracting evil and disease. The Rigveda is regarded as the earliest, dating to around 1100 BCE, but emerging from a long oral tradition beforehand. The history of the period between 1500 and 500 BCE in northwestern India is known as the Vedic period, when the Vedas took shape, and with them, in the latter part of this period, instruction manuals called Brahmanas for carrying out the Vedic rites and commentaries on the inner meaning of the text and rituals called Aranyakas. Discussion of a philosophical kind is found in some of these latter, but the chief philosophical texts connected with the Vedas are the Upanishads. Upanishad literally means to sit attentively close, that is, to a master or teacher, and they are known as Vedanta because they are regarded as the final parts or closing sections of the Vedas, encapsulating the Veda's high meaning or purpose. The Vedic literature is regarded as Sruti, that is, what is heard, meaning revealed, either directly by supreme reality itself or through apprehension by rishis, or sages, of the ancient past in the course of their meditations. Sruti is contrasted with Smriti, remembered, which describes all other literature. Various of the Sruti texts themselves say that they were crafted by the skill of rishis in the same way as a carpenter builds a chariot. Of the hundreds or so Upanishads, 10 are regarded as most important, and among them, the Great Forest Teaching holds a significant place. It was composed about 700 BCE and is attributed to the sage Yajnavalkya. It begins, Om. Dawn is the head of the sacrificial horse. The sun is the eye of the sacrificial horse. The wind is his breath. The fire that is in all men is his open mouth. The year is his body. That gives a misleading impression of what follows, for the exchanges and discussions constituting the main body of the text are a striking source of concepts about the self, or Atman, and its oneness with ultimate reality, Brahman, which appear in more express detail in the darshanas of the philosophical tradition. The manner in which these are presented admits of widely varying interpretations, but the richness of suggestion is great. The Sanskrit scholar who did much to bring the Upanishadic tradition to serious Western attention, Paul Deussen, from 1845 to 1919, wrote of it that it throws, quote, if not the most scientific, yet still the most intimate and immediate light upon the last secret of existence, end quote, a view shared by Schopenhauer, who kept a copy of the Upanishads at his bedside and said of them, quote, in the whole world there is no study so beneficial and so elevating. It has been the solace of my life, and it will be the solace of my death. Before looking at some of the darshanas in more detail, it is useful to have a brief survey of them all. The 6 orthodox schools are Samkhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva Mimamsa, sometimes just Mimamsa, and Vedanta, sometimes Uttara Mimamsa. The 3 main heterodox schools, there were other minor schools, are, as already mentioned, Carvaka, Buddhism, and Jainism. Samkhya is the oldest of the orthodox schools and was originated by the author of the Samkhya Sutras, the sage Kapila, in the 7th or 6th century BCE. It asserts a dualism of matter, prakriti, and consciousness, purusha, which also means spirit or self, and it regards both as equally real. It is pluralistic in holding that purusha is many, that consciousness is many. Yoga is associated with the Samkhya school as the practical application of its teaching. The writing of one Patanjali, dated sometime before the 5th century CE, set out these techniques of posture, breathing, and meditation that latter schools of yoga developed. The Yoga Sutras attributed to Patanjali, though they very much are later than those by Kapila, accept the Samkhya ontology and epistemology, but add a commitment to a form of deism lacking in the non-theistic Samkhya doctrine. The Nyaya school's teachings on epistemology and logic were written down by Askasappada Gautama in the 6th century BCE in the Nyaya Sutras. In advancing a form of direct realism, it emphasized the importance of critical evaluation of the sources of knowledge, pramanas, which it identified as sense perception, inference, and the testimony of experts. The Vaisheshika school is a variant of and development from the Nyaya school. Its founder is said to be Kanada Kashyapa, who lived somewhere between the 6th and 2nd century BCE. The school proposed a naturalistic and atomistic metaphysics, arguing that everything is composed from indestructible, indivisible, and eternal atoms, paramanu. Its theories of relations and causation are highly sophisticated. The Nyaya school and Vaisheshika schools are often treated as a single school. Purva Mimamsa is the closest thing among the darshanas to a religion in the standard meaning of this term. It is ritualistic and requires of its adherents an unquestioning faith in the Vedas and observance of the sacrifices they prescribe, most particularly the fire sacrifices, believing that unless these are performed, the universe will suffer ill effects. Another name for Purva Mimamsa is therefore Karma Mimamsa, because of the focus on action, karma. However, it is not straightforwardly theistic. Its earlier adherents did not attribute importance to deities, but later developments of the outlook imported theistic elements. The founder of the school, Jaimini, lived in the 4th century BCE. He argued that verbal testimony, the word or shabda of the Vedas, is the only authoritative source of knowledge. The school regarded the Vedas as self-revealed, unwritten, and held that this established their authority. Vedanta is the school whose metaphysics is similar enough to that of Buddhism to make it seem somewhat familiar to Western eyes. Vedanta means end of the Vedas and accordingly takes much of its inspiration from the Upanishads. It teaches that the word or that the world is an illusion. Maya, one of the strands of Vedanta owing to the sage Adi Shankaracharya, said to have lived in the 8th century BCE, teaches the doctrine of Advaita, non-dualism, laying stress on the Upanishadic theme that the individual soul, Atman, and the ultimate reality, Brahman, are one and the same. Vedanta lays stress on the ideas of reincarnation, Punarjanma, and the effect of accumulated karma on the prospects of reincarnation and ultimate liberation from it. The earliest of the heterodox schools is Carvaka, also known as Lakayata, or it could be that a school of that name was so close in doctrine to Carvaka that the two merged. It dates from the 8th century BCE. It is non-theistic, materialistic in its metaphysics, and empiricist in epistemology, regarding direct perception as the principal source of knowledge. Buddhism was founded by Siddhartha Gautama, who lived somewhere between the early 6th century and the late 4th century BCE, and probably in the latter. It is a non-theistic philosophy teaching a means of liberation from suffering, as the other schools do, but with a radically different metaphysics, denying the reality of Atman and Brahman altogether. Later versions of Buddhism accreted supernaturalistic trappings over time, as almost all systems do when they become a popular outlook and system for dealing with life. Popular here meaning of the people. Buddhism is familiar the world over, attracting both adherents and interest, although no longer much of a presence in its country of origin. Legends of the Buddha making him a prince who had lived a sheltered life until one day he left his palace and saw the suffering of the world grew over the centuries. What remains basic to the various Buddhist schools is the doctrine of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path to liberation from existence by attainment of nirvana, or extinction. The Four Noble Truths are that life is suffering, that suffering arises from desire and ignorance, that suffering can be escaped, and that one can achieve liberation by living an ethical life and by meditation. The Eightfold Path is right vision or understanding, right emotion, right speech, right action, right livelihood, work that does not harm others, right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation. Jainism was said to have existed for a long time before being given a fresh impetus by the sage Mahavira in the 6th century BCE. Jains regarded him as the 24th Tirthankara, or discoverer of a ford across the sea of endless births and deaths, or samsara. Tirthankaras are those who reach a true understanding of the nature of the self and are able therefore to cross samsara, leaving behind them guidance to others who can follow and thus attain liberation, or moksha. It is non-theistic and teaches aestheticism and ashimsa, or non-harm. The Astika schools are the tributaries that flow into Hinduism, a set of related outlooks and practices which, in the course of their evolution, became theistic during the period of the emerging Hindu synthesis between 500 BCE and 300 CE. It was in this period that the authority of the Vedas was proclaimed, together with the integration of the Smriti writings, notable among them the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and especially the section of the former known as the Bhagavad Gita, which has such a high status in Hinduism that it is sometimes regarded as Suchi rather than Smriti, heard rather than remembered. Of the Nastika schools, Buddhism in its various forms, and Jainism in one of its two principal traditional forms, continue to exist. Carvaka has long since been extinct, however. All the schools share much in outlook, some where all of the themes of suffering, liberation by extinction following upon grasp of the true nature of reality and or the accumulation of sufficient good karma, the illusory nature of things in common experience, asceticism, and meditation as potentiators of the liberating process, these recur across the schools and bear upon the central ethical concern they share. The goal of an escape from suffering. The differences are chiefly of fine technical detail in the epistemological and metaphysical underpinnings of these themes. A more detailed look at some of the darshanas gives a better indication of their philosophical sophistication. Consider the dualism of Samkhya. This is not a mind-matter dualism in the sense of the Western tradition, but a dualism of consciousness and everything that is not consciousness, respectively Purusha and Prakriti. Moreover, Purusha is a pure consciousness, something more fundamental than what might ordinarily be meant by mind. Samkhya holds that Prakriti, everything other than consciousness, consists of three qualities or properties, gunas, in combination, respectively sattva, essence, the concept of which suggests illumination, clarity, harmony, goodness, rajas, dust, the concept of which suggests activity, passion, movement, change, and tamas, darkness, the concept of which suggests lethargy, heaviness, despair, and chaos. Prakriti is stable in a state of pure latency or potentiality when the three gunas are in equilibrium. When there is imbalance between them in a sequence of events unfolds in which Prakriti manifests itself in 23 independent structures called tattvas. The highest is buddhi, or will or intellect, which, although not conscious, is so close to Purusha that it seems to be so. The other structures, going swiftly through the list, are a sense of individual selfhood, which can be called egoity, the animate capacities of sensing, speaking, moving, eating, and procreating, the subtle elements of sound, taste, touch, sight, and smell, and the gross elements of space, air, fire, water, and earth, which in their combinations constitute the ordinary objects of the physical world. The three reliable sources of information, according to some Samkhya epistemology, are perception, inference, and expert testimony in that order of importance. Again, perception first, then inference second, then expert testimony third. We know that there is a fire when we see it. We know with a degree of defeasibility that there is a fire when we infer its existence from seeing smoke rising in the distance. We know with a greater degree of defeasibility that there is a fire that we can neither see nor infer, but which is reported to us by a reliable informant. In perception, the sense organs perceive their objects, colors for the eye, sounds for the ear, and these perceptions in their turn are assembled into a representation by the mind, to which the ego contributes its perspective, and the intellect, which contributes to understanding. This threefold combination is knowledge, as this shows. These are the three constituents of what in English could be given the overall name mind. This tripartite mind is not Purusha, but Purusha or witnesses this activity, thereby contributing to consciousness. A simile has it that Purusha is the lord of the house, the tripartite mind is the doorkeeper, and the sense organs are the doors. The soteriological aspect of Samkhya, that is, the doctrine about liberation from suffering, has a subtlety that arises from the fact that Purusha is in ontological terms completely distinct from Prakriti, that is, a different order of reality. The doctrine is not that Purusha as true self needs to be liberated from the bonds of Prakriti, because as a different order of reality, Purusha cannot be in any relation, other than as witness, of anything that is or arises from Prakriti. Rather, liberation consists in the realization that one is not bound by or to Prakriti. It consists in recognizing the ontological difference and its entailment that Purusha is already free and has always been free. A common feature of Indian soteriologies is that they are Gnostic. Liberation is the attainment of knowledge. The source of suffering is ignorance. Causation is an important theme in the darshanas. Samkhya teaching on this is that Effects exist prior to their manifestations in the form of a latency in their causes. Causation is the making manifest of what was implicit in the cause already. The importance of this for the Samkhya metaphysics is that it entails that the world, as an emanation of the Absolute, or Brahman, was already in the Absolute before its manifestation. In terms of Prakriti, the idea seems to be that causation is the unfolding of the cause itself into the effect. In justification of this view, Samkhya says that it does not require the bringing into existence of anything that did not exist beforehand, and explains why effects are always of the same nature as their causes. Cows always give birth to cows. Samkhya is regarded as the least developed or sophisticated of the darshanas because it is the earliest. The philosophies, or because of the connection between them, the philosophy of the Nyaya, Vaisheshika school are not only more developed but have features which are recognizably similar to major ideas in Western metaphysics. Nyaya can be translated as logic, and much of its debate concerned methods of proof. Vaisheshika is a philosophy of nature which seeks to identify the variety of things that cognition and language apply to, thus providing them with their objective basis. Earlier commentators and developers of these views connected them, much later commentators and developers, in the later centuries of the first millennium CE, gave them a theistic dimension and associated the combined school with Shiva worship. Shiva was the destroyer transformer, is one of the Trimurti, or Hindu Trinity, with Brahma and Vishnu. Anyways, a defining commitment of Nyaya Vaisheshika is summed up as existence is knowability and nameability. In its classical period, the Vaisheshika developed a sophisticated theory of causation involving a set of rigorously defined primary existence, or of substance, quality, motion, particular, universal, inherence, and non-existence. The Sanskrit term padartha etymologically means referent of a word, and the first three categories of substance, quality, and motion are regarded as primary, but all the categories have as titva, which means isness, that is being, required for their knowability and nameability. They are accordingly real and objective. Non-existence or absence, added to the list of categories later, has independent existence likewise, for the absence of something can be known about and talked about. There are 9 substances in the category of substance: earth, water, air, fire, ether, time, space, self, and mind. There are 24 qualities in the category of quality, a very disparate list including sensory qualities of color, sound and smell, and abstractions like hatred, merit, and nearness. In the category of motion, there are 5 types: throwing upwards, throwing downwards, expanding, contracting, and going. Across the categories, there are particular associations between qualities and substances. Earth is related to smell, water to taste, fire to color, and so on. The self is associated with knowledge, pleasure, desire, frustration, and hatred, among other qualities. Substances are either permanent or impermanent. The permanent, because indestructible, substances are the atoms and what they constitute. The atoms are not only ultimate in the ontological sense, there is nothing into which, as the name implies, they can be divided, but they are also ultimately individual or distinct from each other. The expression antya vishisha to indicate this is a source of the school's name, Vaisheshika, from Vishisha. By their nature, atoms combine and separate to form substances of intermediate size, which are therefore impermanent. Space, time, and cells are, however, both completely individual and infinite in size, although each self is constricted when linked to a physical body. The school distinguished between being white, as a quality and whiteness as a universal. This relates to the fundamental substratum property model of its ontology. The substance, or dharman, has the property dharma inherent, being a special concept in the doctrine. A technical reformulation of ordinary language statements into form provides an ontologically perspicuous account of what is being said. Thus, to talk or think of a cow is to talk or think of a universal cowness or essence of a cow being instantiated at a location X, the substratum, by the relation of inherence, yielding something like cowness is inhering here. It has been pointed out that in a way even more marked than in German, Sanskrit terms can be compounded and supplemented both to increase abstraction and to nominalize abstractions in such a way that reference to them imputes independent reality to them. One result is that the relation of inherence is treated as independently real. This was thought to be required because the unity of inseparable things, for example, a surface and its color, compounded from a substance and a quality, require that what links them should be as real as they are. The Vaisheshika doctrine of Samavaya inherence is fundamental to its realistic cosmology. Inherence holds between part and whole, quality and substance, action and substance, generic characters and their individual manifestations, the eternal substance and the ultimate individuality of atoms. From the smallest to the largest scale, everything hangs together because of Samavaya. Inherence is one of the three types of cause recognized by the school: inherent, non-inherent, and efficient. The inherent cause is what the effect inheres in, as the cloth inheres in the threads from which it is woven. The non-inherent cause of a correlative of either the cause or the effect. For example, the position of the threads is a non-inherent cause of the cloth. The threads could have been woven together in a different arrangement. The efficient cause is the working of the loom that wove the threads into our cloth. The Vaisheshika doctrine differs markedly from the Samkhya view that the effect must exist in its cause, holding that the effect must be a new existence, not contained in the cause, but freshly created by the cause. A cause is defined as, quote, an invariable precedent of the effect, end quote, to avoid treating anything and everything that preceded an effect as part of its cause. To avoid difficulties about how long a period can elapse, how many intervening factors there can be between a cause and its effect, a qualification is added that the cause must not be too remote from the effect, remoteness or irrelevance being defined in several ways according to the length and nature of the intervening chain of factors. In Nyaya Vaisheshika, four forms of cognition are regarded as valid: perception, inference, comparison, and testimony. In the great debate between the philosophers of this school and the Buddhists, the latter argued that there are only two valid forms of cognition: perception and inference. The leading Buddhist scholar, Nagarjuna, in the 2nd century CE, challenged the Nyaya Vaisheshika to explain what validates the pramanas themselves. If a knowledge claim is based on perception, what justifies perception itself as a basis of knowledge? The danger of a regress threatens. It is a parallel to the problem of induction as a form of reasoning, whose only justification seems to be the inductive grounds of its past successes. The Nyaya Vaisheshika thinkers could reply that the pramanas are self-validating in that they demonstrate their validity when they validate knowledge claims. So, just as lamplight illuminates the lamp from which it shines. Nagarjuna replied that this kind of example works only if we think of lamplight as first not being light, which is a contradiction. The Nyaya Sutras define perception pratyaksa, a non-verbal, non-deviant connection between sense and object. Over time, an evolution in the concept occurred, shifting its focus from the act of perceiving, as classical Nyaya Vaisheshika had it, to the percept itself, a change that was pounced on by Buddha's critics, forcing a late 6th century CE returned to insistence on the act instead of its content. Error and illusion are explained as having three sources. One is to believe that a non-existing thing exists. The second is to think that something that exists only in consciousness exists outside consciousness. The third is the case where what is perceived cannot be regarded as unreal because it is perceived, and yet what one thought was being perceived is not real but is something else, as an illusion or a misperception. For example, seeing a bush in the dark and thinking it is a dog. Nyaya's particular province is, as mentioned, logic. Its classical inferential schema has this form. First, there is the statement of a position, followed by the evidence in its favor, then a statement of the general principle involved, then a demonstration that the instant case falls under the principle, and then the conclusion that the statement of the position is correct. A classical Nyaya example as follows. The proposition is that there is fire on the hill. The evidence is that smoke is rising above the hill. The principle is where there is smoke, there is fire. And then subsumption is this particular event of smoke rising above the hill accords with the principles that connect smoke and fire. And then the conclusion is that this proves the proposition that there is fire on the hill. The meta-theory of such inferences employs an interesting anticipation of the use of Venn-like or set theoretical-like techniques of inclusion and exclusion from classes or kinds. Thus, what is proposed must refer to something that falls within the class of things covered by the principle, or if a negative instance is cited, must fall outside it. Vary the example to, there is no fire on the hill, inferred from an absence of smoke, and the concept of what is referred to by the subject term of the proposition to be proved must likewise fall within the concept of the ground of evidence offered, and so on. The Nyaya Vaisheshika is a living philosophical tradition. The Navayaya is a highly developed technical form of it, which from the late 13th century CE to the present occupies something like the same relation to its classical antecedents as modern Western philosophy bears to ancient philosophy. Its theories of universals, truths, and knowledge, as the rudimentary sketch of them must give only hints, are of the first interest and refinement, and make an illuminating and enriching comparison with the same themes in Western philosophy. The Azteca schools of philosophy share a common point of departure, however, whether in dualist or monist forms, from the Upanishadic conception of the relation between Atman, or self, and Brahman, the absolute, or reality as a whole. In the classical Upanishadic view, Atman, or self, and Brahman, reality as a whole, are two sides, subjective and objective. The self is subjective, and the reality as a whole is objective. But they are of the same reality. They are, in a sense, as the Advaita, non-dualist form of Vedanta teaches, one and the same. This is the meaning of Mahavakya, great saying of the Upanishads, that thou art, interpreted to entail I am that, and hence Atman is Brahman, or self is reality as a whole. Together with the working out in detail of the metaphysical and epistemological aspects of a view that would identify the correct route to the soteriological outcome, namely, how to achieve liberation from suffering by overcoming the ignorance that is its fundamental cause, is what the Azteca school aims to achieve. Buddhism's claim is that this is a mistake. In sharp contrast to the Azteca programs, Buddhism asserts that there is no Atman, there is no self, there is no Brahman, or no absolute reality. There is not only no self, but no permanence of any kind. The postulation of the existence of an attempt to explicate the nature of a permanent self is not only the wrong target, it is the very source of suffering itself. The rigorously critical argumentation of the Buddhist thinkers is aimed at achieving a reduction of phenomenal thinking and its objects to a liberating grasp of how things really are. The Buddhist schools argued among themselves with great sophistication. A way of illustrating this is by reference to a distinction drawn in several texts dating from the 3rd century BCE onward, called the Abhidharma texts, and consisting of commentaries upon the developments of the suttas, or teachings of the Buddha. The distinction is between primary or substantial existence and secondary, conceptual or derived existence. The Madhyamaka school argued that everything is a secondary existent. When a search is made for primary existence, nothing is found. If an attempt is made to reduce secondary existence to the primary existence, which are their putative basis, the reduction leads to emptiness. Nothing has inherent existence. Transposed to the idiom of truth, this amounts to saying that, quote, the ultimate truth is that there are no ultimate truths, end quote. But emptiness, or sunyata, is itself the outcome of causes and conditions, not in the sense that there were, once upon a time, primary existence which have since ceased to be, leaving just the secondary existence behind, but in the sense that the things we take to be real in our experience of them are mere conventionalities with no substance. To understand that they are empty, meaningless, insubstantial, a mere flow of nothings, is to see them as not worth the desire or craving we have for them. So long as we think them substantial, we are ignorant of their true nature, and that is why suffering arises. The Yogacara school thought that the Madhyamaka doctrine was unsustainable, on the ground that nothing can be a secondary existent without there being a primary existent for it to be secondary too. They therefore had to postulate a primary existent and nominated the non-dual stream of consciousness for the role, mind only, or citta matra. As the name implies, Yogacara adherents had a particular interest in meditation, which explains the motivation for identifying the primary existent with what lies at the deepest phenomenological level of untrammeled consciousness and meditation. Nevertheless, the Yogacara's doctrine of the 3 aspects, specifying the nature of citta matra, shows that the terminus of the argument, emptiness, though differently described, is the same as in the Madhyamaka doctrine. The first aspect is the realm of subject-object duality, as those who are unenlightened think of the world, demonstrated by the language they use. The second aspect is the dependent aspect, the flow of experience which the unenlightened incorrectly polarize into subject and object, whereas the flow of experience is all there is. The third perfected aspect is the truth about things, which is grasped in meditation, emptiness, but redefined as non-duality. In the Dinaga Dharmakirti school, only 2 modes of cognition are recognized, perception and inference. They constitute right cognition, defined as knowledge not contradicted by experience. The Dinaga Dharmakirti school. Dinaga's argument for there being only 2 modes of cognition is that ordinary experience gives us just 2 aspects, the particular, which is what we perceive, and the universal, which is what we infer. Universals are not real, and the perception of a particular occurs only momentarily, that moment consisting in unconstructed perception, whereas what immediately follows is constructed by the interpretive attribution of qualities and properties, namely universals. The constructed perception can, however, lead to right action, and therefore, in virtue of not being contradicted by experience, counts as knowledge. Given that this view could be described as turning on a distinction between knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description, one can see the clear similarity to views such as Bertrand Russell's and later Western epistemology. Dinaga held that there are 4 kinds of perception: sense perception, mental perception, extrasensory perception, and reflexive perception, or self-awareness. Other Buddhist scholars were critical of the inclusion of this last as a form of perception, the reflexive perception, or self-awareness, which they took to imply a form of awareness of being aware, implying a self or a higher self, which in a doctrine teaching the unreality of self is obviously a complication. Influential ideas were developed by the Dinaga Dharmakirti school in logic as well as epistemology. Dinaga's The Wheel of Reasons, showing all the possible combinations of a reason with its positive and negative instances and specifying which of them constitute a valid inference. Of the 9 such combinations, only 2 are valid. In both cases, when the reason is present in the subject and in the positive example, and absent from the negative example. For example, in judging that there is a fire on that hill over there, because one sees smoke arising above it, one has a positive example of fire and smoke being connected, i.e. the fire in one's kitchen, for example, and a negative example where there is never a connection of fire and smoke, i.e. the waters of a lake. The path to liberation for Jains, their name derives from Jina, or victory, implying conquest of suffering by passing over the cycle of rebirth to the liberation of non-existence, consists of doing no harm, detachment, aestheticism, and acceptance of the fact that reality is infinitely complex and many-sided, so that it is never possible to give a single definitive description or account of anything. This means that anything we think or say can at best only be partly true, and is ever only from a certain point of view. Every point of view has some truth in it. So from a certain point of view, X is, and from a certain point of view, X is not, are both possible simultaneously. The Jain doctrine of substance accordingly allows that it both decays and is stable. To assert that it must definitely be one or the other is one-sided, or even extremist. The parallel with skepticism is striking. It was suggested that Pyrrho of Elis visited India and learned his outlook from its naked philosophers, the Gymnosophists. These could very likely have been Jains, whose most assiduous devotees indeed went about naked. The only source of knowledge about the Carvaka Lokayata school are the hostile comments and criticism of its adversaries. They report that the school was empiricist, materialist, and hedonistic. It was radically empiricist in epistemology, holding that sense perception is the only valid form of cognition. It was radically materialist in metaphysics, denying the existence of souls, gods, or an afterlife, and it was said to be hedonistic in ethics, extolling the virtues of pleasure. Lokayata means of the people, and perhaps initially referred to the materialistic and this worldly assumptions and the lifestyle of unlettered ordinary people. But it came to mean skeptical because the restriction to sense experience as the only valid means to knowledge implies that inference is inherently doubtful and conditional, an implication accepted by the school. Carvaka is the name of the superstitious founder of the school, although an earlier founder and supposed author of a lost sutra known only in fragments is one Barhaspatya. The Barhaspatya Sutra is quoted as saying that perception tells us nothing about reincarnation, or whether or not rituals and sacrifices do any good at all, or whether other worlds such as hells and heavens exist, or whether actions produce good or ill consequences in this or supposed other lives. Accordingly, there is no reason to believe any of it. Instead, perception tells us that natural things are their own causes, their properties residing in and arising from their physical constitution. Consciousness is a product of physical processes in the body. Since physical existence is reality, pleasure and the avoidance of pain are what is good. Delicious food, young women, fine clothes, perfumes, and garlands are said, by way of criticism, to be the Carvaka school's idea of heaven, while moksha, the liberation of extinction, occurs naturally and inevitably with death. The view of life actually or functionally held by most people in today's developed societies is precisely that of the Carvaka school, the only school that is now dead. These sketches of ideas in some of the Indian philosophical schools are intended to indicate that if one had the linguistic competence to make a detailed study of them, doing so would provide great insight into problems that are as fundamental to Western philosophy as to them. It has therefore been surmised that there was communication between Indian and Greek thinkers. The great Persian Empire abutted both their worlds. To the east and west, respectively, you had the Greek to the west and the Indians to the east, the Persian Empire in the middle. And for many centuries, and it is plausible to think that there was no contact or exchange of ideas. Greek and Sanskrit are descendants of a single earlier language, Indo-European or simple Aryan, and languages carry hints of their users' worldviews and their vocabularies and structures. Ideas of substance and property, causality, knowledge, mind, and consciousness, the question whether what we encounter in everyday experience actually reveals or misleads us as to the true nature of reality. These lies at the heart of philosophy, and both Indian and Western traditions of thought address them in remarkably similar ways.